whiskey.
The whiskey story.
Yeah.
My father was raised as a Baptist in Cordell, Oklahoma. Born in 1902. Raised in this small town, spoke not one word of English when he went to school at age 6.
Yeah.
Promptly got beat up. Learned English probably pretty quickly and did fine. Eventually he learned to fight. And taught me to fight, taught my brother to fight. My brother took it seriously, and he became the United States highest ranked judo person from the Kodokan in Japan. But anyway, they had come from Russia, Noya Messer, Russia, and that's the story. And had grown up in Cordell. And when Dad got to be 14, there was one person left in town, in this little town, who would still beat him up if he chose to fight. Well, Dad didn't choose to fight. He ran, but he was faster than anyone else. He plowed with horses and mules and all, when he was a kid. Had a strong upper body, and he would run from this guy every day. This guy would chase him home from school, or chase him for a little bit, and Dad would run ahead of him. One day Dad ran from him, and he may have teased him a little bit, just kind of, and he jumped over a little low fence around somebody's house. And he caught his toe on the fence and fell down. He knew that the guy was right behind him. He was going to catch him. He was going to hit him and beat him up. And he said, I knew I was caught. I got up, and as I was standing up, I was straightening my body, my legs, and my arm at the same time, and met this guy coming down over the fence, and I knocked him clear back over the fence and out. He was unconscious. The guy left town the next day. He couldn't stand the ignominy of, being beat by a 14-year-old kid. He was 17 years old. He was the big guy in the high school, and all of a sudden my father was the toughest guy in Cordell, Oklahoma. Well, he never hurt anybody. I mean, he knew that. So Dad went off to college, went to Baylor, which is a Baptist school in Waco, Texas. Strong upper body, became a pole vaulter, And while he was there, it was the early days. There was no television, nothing in Waco, no entertainment, no girls in the school. Not many girls went to college back then. Entertainment on Saturday night was boxing. And Dad was given a full scholarship and lived in the athletic dorm. And on Saturday night, you could challenge anybody and box. And that was their entertainment for Saturday night. Dad told, I don't like to fight. I hate to fight. He had had enough of fighting. There was no charm to that to him. He'd been beat up too many times until he got to be the big Mamu. And he said, one day I was in the drugstore, and in the booth behind me, I heard someone say Geis doesn't fight. I think he's a girly guy. Well, you know what that means now. They didn't use the same terms we use today, but Dad said, when he said, I think he might be a girly guy, Dad said, I knew I had to fight. So he told him, you can choose anyone you want, I'll fight one fight. So they chose the toughest guy in the athletic dorm. And Dad said there was a guy with a thick body, a heavy, thick body. He said, I thank the Lord they didn't choose him, because I knew that, that guy was really strong. But this guy was built much like my father, strong upper body. And so he said, we fought. He said, I knew how to fight. I'd been fighting all my life. He said he never hit me in the face. I just beat the poop out of him. Didn't knock him out or anything like that, but I hit him so many times in the face, and he never hit me in the face. But he said he did hit me in the chest once. He said he broke a rib, because when I got back to my room and took off my t-shirt, and apparently they had boxed in t-shirts, he said I had a bruise in my chest that big around. He said, I never let anybody see that bruise. He said, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go shower. Yeah. Wear a t-shirt to the shower, wear a t-shirt back. He said it took a month before that big bruise went away, and no one ever saw that bruise. But he said the next time he heard someone talking in the drugstore about him, he said, well, that guy, he doesn't like to fight, but he can fight. Yeah. Well, he eventually went to the Baptist seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. He was going to be a preacher boy. 5 years, and he had a job, paid all the bills. He ran the crew that shoveled snow, shoveled the snow off the sidewalks, trimmed the trees, mowed the lawns, built paths, did all that stuff. He had 30 men under him, and again, he was strong and tough, and he could run 30 guys, and no one gave him any trouble. And then he met my mother. She was a professional dancer, had danced on the Chautauqua circuit. She had a school in Louisville, Kentucky, and taught dancing, and she was like 25 or 27 or something like that, kind of. And well, Baptists and dancing didn't really go together, and he kind of had a choice to make, and he went with the girl. So I understand that. And he never preached a sermon outside of the seminary, but he could read Greek until he was 80 years old. He'd spend 10 minutes a day just reading his Greek Bible just to keep his language up. And Lord, I could never impress him about words in medical terms and that sort of thing. So he came back to Oklahoma and went into business with his father, who was from Russia and had a third-grade education, and his family, or his wife's family, I think it was, had a grain business. So Dad, began as a truck driver and then learned the business, and pretty soon he was running the business and built the mill, and it was Geis Mills in Enid, Oklahoma. And it became a pretty big operation. They had 6 or 8 truck drivers and 30, 40 men, and they would buy tons of wheat and grain and corn and molasses and stuff, and make pellets and cubes and all this stuff and sell it to the farmers in northern Oklahoma. During World War II, he had the opportunity to buy a train car load full of a sugar that was normally used to bulk up pills. Now, a normal pill is like an aspirin, is 300 milligrams. But the active ingredient in some pills is like 10 milligrams or 100 milligrams or something like that. If it's 10 milligrams and 290, and the pill would be so tiny you couldn't pick it up, so they bulk it up to the size of an aspirin so you can pick it up and swallow it. And one of the things that they use for that is a 6-carbon sugar. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's galactose, but don't hold me to that. And so there had been a flood, and they had flooded out this train car load full of sugar, and so they sold it just as wheat or grain or something, just calories to put in feed, or Dad bought it for that. It was going to be something that he could put into the feed, and it was during World War II, and some of those things were kind of hard to get, and I'm sure it didn't cost him very much at all. It was all surplus stuff. So I went with him when he went out to examine this stuff. They had unloaded it, and it was in 300-pound drums of cardboard. The cardboard drums were at least that thick and had a band on the top, and we took the band off and opened them up, and inside was the first plastic bag I'd ever seen. It was a clear plastic bag, because this was used for medicine. But since it had been in this flood, it was declared unfit for human consumption, and they couldn't repair it. They just sold it for junk. And so we opened up this bag, and we lifted out a pellet of where the water had seeped in, and it was kind of like hard. We lifted out this pellet, which was stained brown and dirty, and here's 295 pounds of the cleanest looking powder, you could imagine. And we tasted it, and it had no sweetness whatsoever. It was not sweet. It's a non-sweet sugar, and it's a 6-carbon sugar. Now, your sugar that you eat at the table is a 12-carbon sugar called sucrose, but lactose, which is in breast milk, glucose, which is in your blood, galactose, there are many sugars. Most of those are 6-carbon sugars, and some of them have no flavor. Fructose is very sweet. It's actually sweeter than sucrose, so that's why fruit has a little less calories and it is very sweet. Oranges, orange juice, all those things are.
How many carbons does that have?
Hmm?
How many carbons does that have?
It's 6-carbon.
Oh,
Fructose is 6-carbon.
Oh.
So anyway, whatever this was, it was 6-carbon, but it had no sweet flavor whatsoever. Well, during World War II, sugar was rationed. We got stamps for our family, and once a week you could get, or once a month, I don't know, you could get a pound of sugar at the store or something like that per family. But you didn't get a lot of sugar. You didn't get a lot of things that were rationed. And so this sugar that Dad had bought was something that they couldn't use to make whiskey because sugar was rationed. It was too darn expensive. You couldn't get it. And so Dad got to thinking. He said, I wonder if the bacteria that make whiskey, I wonder if those bacteria know that sugar is not sweet. Do you think that if you added that to cornmeal, and being a manufacturer of chicken feed and cow feed, he had plenty of corn, do you think those bacteria know this stuff isn't sweet? Do you think it would make whiskey? if it does, I'm rich. I've got 100,000 pounds of this sugar, and if you buy it on the black market, it's $1 a pound. If you don't, it's 50 cents a pound. If you got stamps, ration stamps. But he was thinking, my God, if I could sell this to the people in Kentucky, that make whiskey, I'd have a fortune. Well, I mean, that would be a lot of money back then. But he didn't know. Will this make whiskey? Would this, would it be toxic? So he made a batch. He had access to copper and all that kind of stuff. He had them making some big copper tanks. We lived in a big old house up in Oklahoma that had been built in 1906. Ancient house, walls bricked this thick, a coal-fired furnace in the basement. And he bought that place for nothing, $6,000, $8,000. Back in the days when the house was $15,000, $20,000. It was a white elephant. No one wanted that big old house because you had to shovel coal every 2 hours. It's cold in Oklahoma in the winter. Every 2 hours you had to get up and shovel coal. You either had to have a slave or you needed to, Dad bought that house, shoveled out the coal. Every 2 hours he had to go down and shovel coal. But when he cleaned out the coal bin, he went down and paid $200 for a big natural gas burner, slid it in there, and we had the warmest house in the city. I mean, it was just wonderful. Every room had a hot water radiator, circulating hot water, and big thick walls, well insulated. And then he put storm windows on, so we had double windows in the winter. I mean, it was remarkable. And it had 65 windows in that house. I had to put those storm windows on. That was a job. But anyway, it had an attic we didn't use, so he, makes this stuff up there and siphons it down to the basement. We had a huge house, 4 floors, and he makes himself a batch of whiskey. It comes out clear as water. Now he's got his book of formula and trade secrets. He knows that, when you make it, you've got to, when you distill it, you've got to throw away the first part because it has ketones and aldehydes in it, and that makes you go blind if you try to drink that. And it comes out clear as water, and well, that doesn't look like whiskey to him. He's never had whiskey. He doesn't know anything about whiskey. Oklahoma is a dry state. You can get 3.2% beer if you're 21. But, no one, we didn't drink in Oklahoma at all. We didn't even know what it was in our family anyway. And so he thought, gosh, I don't know about this, So he finds out that to make whiskey out of it, it's put in charred oak barrels for 3 to 7 years. If it's 7 years or something they can call it, or 5 to 7 is called bourbon, I think. I'm not sure about these names, but it's golden brown colored, And well, he didn't have 3 to 7 years to test this stuff out, so he gets a oak board and he runs it through a planing mill, gets these little curlicule chips, puts it in the oven, chars it, puts all these chips in this big tank, in this big copper vat, about this big around and about 5 feet high, and he boils it for 5 or 6 hours.
Boils it.
Yeah. And he's got it set up so that the steam goes up and it goes is cooled and drips back down in. And he's already distilled it once, so he's thrown away the bad stuff, it comes out this beautiful golden color. Well, it looks good now, but you know, it tastes like whiskey, you know, and he doesn't know what whiskey's supposed to taste like. I mean, it's terrible stuff. When so we're going to visit Grandma Reeves up in Louisville, and so he takes some of his whiskey with him to Louisville, Kentucky, and goes to a big brewing place there, and gets the brewmeister and says, "Here, I'd like for you to taste my whiskey and tell me what you think." And he says, the guy tasted it and said, Mr. Guys, this is better whiskey than we make. You've got to understand, we make it 10,000 gallons at a time. You're making it 300 gallons at a time. But this is better whiskey than we make. I would estimate it somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. He was about 3 weeks old. Well, driving back to Oklahoma, to Enid, Oklahoma, Dad's eyes, I'm sure, were just going ching, 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 ching. Dollar signs were just flashing. And that week, rationing went off sugar. So it was about 1945, early 46, something like that. So it just took him too long to figure it out, you know. So he just mixed it in with the feed. All this stuff just got mixed in with the feed, but he'd made whiskey, and you know, he'd learned to mix it with 7-Up. Now that was what a drink was: 7-Up and whiskey, not Coke and whiskey, not not lemonade and whiskey, not, that was just. And when someone would come over, would you like a mixed drink? That's what it was. A jigger and fill up the glass with ice and 7-Up. Well, it's pretty good that way. And so he goes to the county attorney, Park Lamberton, and he's made this. This is earlier, and Dad's an honest man. I mean, he's a preacher, essentially. Not preaching, but he's been trained, and it's not illegal to make it. It's illegal to sell it in Oklahoma. He goes to Park Lamberton and says, "Park, I'd like to make a little of my own drinking beverage. Is there a problem with that?" And Park looks at him and says, "Well, you're not going to sell any of it, are you, Edwin?" Dad says, "No, of course not. Well, all I can say, Edwin," and this is a small town, everybody knows each other, and they know each other. All I can say is that if anyone ever comes to your house and wants to look around, don't let them in. They won't have a search warrant. I'm the only person in this county who can issue a search warrant, and I promise you they won't have one. By the way, Edwin, my wife has a little trouble sleeping at night. Well, first gallon every year went to Park Lamberton. Dad's best friends, Mom and Dad's best friends, were Andy Sarton and Leona Sarton. And Leona Sarton's father was the county judge, Judge Richardson. That was her maiden name. Dad goes to Judge Richardson, says, "Judge Richardson, I'd like to make a little of my own drinking beverage. Is there a problem with that?" "Well, you're not going to sell any of it, are you, Edwin?" "Of course not." "Well, all I can say, Edwin, is if it ever were to come to my court, and my court would have jurisdiction in this matter, they'll never get a conviction. By the way, Edwin, my wife has a little trouble sleeping at night." I don't know whether he said it too. One of them said it, and then Dad told that story, and I always add that comment to both of them. And so Dad would make 300 gallons a year, and every extended member of our family, and we had farmers and cousins and uncles and friends and people in the mill, and they all got a gallon at Christmas. Uncle Dell and Uncle Clarence and Uncle Joe and Uncle, and when there was someone getting married and they needed to have a something, at the celebration, Dad would furnish spike punch maybe or something like that. And once a year, they would have a party for every school teacher that the 3 kids schools. And so that was always 2 schools, the junior high and the high school, and eventually just the high school. But every teacher in junior high and high school would show up for the party, and they would get 2 drinks. You get, would you like a refill? No one got more, no one got drunk. They got a drink, mixed drink, and of course in Oklahoma that was crazy, crazy wild, and so anyway, he eventually moved to Rosenberg, Texas, near Houston, and never made any more. But he was always proud of the flavor of his whiskey, and it was very, very good. Now I know that I've heard that people make whiskey and then they put charred posts, oak posts, in the barrels or something like that. But I always thought it was unique that he would char these little chips and boil this stuff. He wouldn't just put it in there for 7 years. He'd just boil it for 6 hours, and it got the color and the flavor of the charred oak. Anyway, so that's I was always a little reluctant to tell people that my father had made whiskey in Oklahoma, because they immediately think you're a bootlegger. But none of his 3 kids, my sister and brother and I, none of us drink. We never cared about it. I got to the University of Oklahoma, we'd have a party. People would drive to Kansas to get whiskey, to drive back to Norman, so that they'd have something to drink. I and another guy, 4 of us, for a date of each one of us with a date, there would be a total of 4. We got a pint of whiskey from one of the guys that had driven up there to get it. But I never got any whiskey from Dad, and I could care less about whiskey today. I mean, it's not a thing. I think it's probably inborn, that we don't care about whiskey. We don't get drunk. We don't enjoy it. It's not our thing. But it was always kind of a fun story for me.